Good evening, brothers and sisters. It's nice to be here in this very salubrious hall. The Law Society, however, who are the guests tonight in a way, certainly they provide the venue for a cost anyway, are being slightly awkward about the numbers. Some of the lawyers may be arriving late. Just as far as the order of this evening goes, what I would do is start off with Dr. Mansour. I ask you to give a very warm welcome for Dr. Mansour.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and as has been the case with each lecture that I have given thus far, I have been looking forward to being with this particular group. Of course, to be with lawyers always gives rise to a certain sentimental feeling, because I spent some 3 years studying law, and the period of study kind of gives you a feeling of bonding with other lawyers. I have been given a brief introduction of what this particular legal organization is attempting to do, and I must say that I have been quite impressed. It seems that they have not forgotten their roots, and they have not forgotten the challenge of trying to subscribe to the highest principles of justice. I commend them in this effort, and I hope that they will be encouraged to continue in spite of some gloomy clouds that may rest in the horizon. I would like to say that normally when lawyers get together, they tend to like to swap war stories of what happened in the court, or what happened in the chambers, or how bad economic times are, or what strategies have been emerging, or new trends in the legal jurisprudence. And I am not an exception. I also am inclined to swap some stories this evening. I'm going to try to confine them because of the limited time. I would like to say, however, in the United States, there are a number of trends that have taken place where lawyers have become generally the objects. To enumerate a few, lawyers are deemed to be, number one, too greedy. Number two, they charge too much. Number three, many members of the public feel that lawyers are coming very close to conflict of interest scenarios, and sometimes going across the line. Specifically, they feel in the whole commercial sector of the junk bond syndromes. With the investment bankers, many lawyers have crossed back and forth well beyond the bonds of what is acceptable from an ethical point of view. Those of you who have the time, there is a book called Den of Thieves, perhaps the most exhaustive book on the junk bond syndrome. I recommend it very highly. It's an excellent book, and it gives all the nuts and bolts and the details of what really happened during the junk bond era, to the point that the United States today may very well falter economically because of those very junk bonds. Lawyers played a very vital role in that area, and they represented consumers, they represented corporations, they represented investment banking, and they had varying links that caused some of them to end up in jail. Some people think that lawyers do not read enough, that after practicing the profession, they narrow their sights and they become very restricted. And this gives rise to a certain uncomfortable feeling when one is relying on these professionals to chart the course of their professional and private life. I feel that rather than try to respond or to rebut to all of those various allegations that collectively have given rise to a credibility gap in the legal profession, Some of that has been added to by the number of lawyers who court politicians and who become intoxicated with the political jargon that rests in Congress. And I'm sure that these allegations have not begun to occur in the UK. I'm describing those things that are happening in the United States. There are a number of people who feel that lawyers are too insensitive to the community. They have abandoned their commitment to look out for the less fortunate, and they only begrudgingly take on cases of people who cannot afford to pay. And then finally, there are those who believe that lawyers have some unusual talents in the area of critical analysis, that they have become expert with in how to evaluate evidence, how to classify that evidence, and how to put that evidence in an orderly platform so that the issues are clear. I feel that some have said that lawyers have used that skill sometimes to distort the truth and to subvert justice. I would like to believe that the complaints that I have outlined are temporary in nature, and that to the extent that they are true in the United States, they will be corrected in short measure. Specifically, I would like to believe that lawyers would begin to read more, that they would recognize the difference between the art of exploring possibilities and becoming familiar and comfortable in the commercial and the legal field of being able to predict probabilities. I would like to believe that lawyers would use business, politics, economics, art as their daily menu, and they would not feel comfortable without having exposed themselves to the contemporary literature in those varying fields. I would like to believe that lawyers are sensitive to the needy and the less fortunate, those, some of whom have been convicted of crimes and are in penal institutions, who feel abandoned and alone. I would like to believe that the lawyers are not going to permit them to be alone. Obviously, lawyers cannot do everything. In this country, it is my hope that the legal profession will not permit the contingency form of payment to come into the country. I think it is one of the most dastardly practices that lawyers have undertaken. This practice in general means that a lawyer can go to a potential client and tell the client, don't pay me any money, I will take your case on contingency. If I win, I get 30 or 40%, sometimes 50%. If I lose, I get nothing. While theoretically this practice may sound innocent, as it is applied, it more often than not gives rise to lawyers who simply speculate. And they almost solicit cases in order to attack anyone. No one is safe, because they feel, especially after coming out of school, they have very little to lose. So they don't have a clientele anyway. So if they win, it could be $1 million, $2 million, $5 million. It's like going to the gambling casino. If they lose, they look to usually their spouse and ask them to subsidize them a bit longer. I think it is important that the lawyers use their legal skills in the interest of understanding and making sure the rest of the world understands what has come to be known as the New World Order. I think the lawyers are probably more uniquely qualified than any professional group in the world to analyze the issues, to make sure that we have not become engaged in a tyranny of legal words, that we have not innocently provided a framework that would otherwise be used for justice to subvert people of color around the world and to destroy any hope of an educational, social, economic, political, and aesthetic future for the third world. I feel that the lawyers can utilize their skills to make sure that we are not duped, that we understand the flow of information, and that's why it's so important to read, so that we are abreast and we are alert, and we, wherever we be found, Africa, Asia, Latin America, or Europe, we utilize our skills and commit our talents to make sure the issues are clearly understood. In that regard, I would like to say that many of the things that I have suggested and recommended, I have found to my great delight, while in the quarter that this society is already committed to. They are already taking steps to realize these kind of goals, and I am only hopeful that their activities will become more widely known so that other groups, their counterparts and colleagues throughout the world, would duplicate their efforts. I want to donate to this organization a book called Laws Without Justice, Do You Still Want to Be a Lawyer? This is a book I wrote a number of years ago, and the final third of the book deals primarily with the legal profession as a career. It targets American legal practice primarily, but it may be of some interest for those who are desirous of having a framework for how the legal profession operates in the United States, including preparing for the bar examination, how to select a school. That's the third, the last third. The middle third is international. It involves a number of cases that our law firm had, the most famous being the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, one of the largest labor unions in America, brought a lawsuit against OPEC. And two African-American Muslim lawyers defended OPEC's interests in that case. And fortunately, alhamdulillah, we won that case. But there was a lot of intrigue involved. When I stood up to cross-examine witnesses, everyone laughed, including the judge, because it was unthinkable that a person of African descent could cross-examine a legal expert of European descent, an economist by training, without embarrassing himself beyond measure. The first part of the book deals with a number of law cases that we had community-orientated, and how the judicial system works in America, and how one has to be creative in representing clients where the jury presumes that your client is guilty. And they will continue to rehearse throughout the course of the case that your client is guilty, and the step between their rehearsal and the verdict is a very, very small one. So one has to employ great imagination, analysis, and alertness in order to protect their client's interests. Again, with great humility, I have to tell you that the first 50 cases that I had, I won all of those. And in the course of winning the cases, and because no one in my family was a lawyer and I didn't know anything about law, I resided in my own ignorance and felt flexible enough to explore new ideas. And I recommend that to you who are practicing law. Be a little bit inflexible, because you may very well need it. Now, I would like to address my primary remarks to the third world, first world, second world, new world order, in whatever order you would like to place them. From everything that I have seen and heard, I think that the world is reaching a level of conflict and hysteria, if not insanity, that may well cause our children to curse us forever, those at least who survive. Survival is not given. There are forces afoot in the world that have distorted and perverted the basic priorities of human existence and human survival. These forces take many forms, but they have generally come to be an extension of the colonial experience. Colonialism in a legal sense diminished, but in a neo-colonialistic sense, that is to say, the insistence that the right to rule is reserved to certain groups either on a geographical basis or on a racial basis, that notion has not died, and in my view, if anything, it has increased. It has become more subtle and hence more devious and more dangerous. It is my belief that those forces will take the form of environmental imbalance. They will take the form of human rights violations and injustice. They will take the form of third world starvation, and they will take the form of assault and battery and genocide on a collective basis unless issues are clearly put into their proper perspective. And again, I call on the lawyers to analyze these issues very carefully. Publicize the analysis. I'm not as concerned with the conclusions as I am with the analysis of the data so that the public can make decisions for themselves. What the public at large lacks is a framework of critical analysis. The intelligence is there. If the proper analysis and information is provided, the people will decide. And I say, let the people decide. In recent years, two areas of activity tended to symbolize and summarize the fear that is increasingly taking over people of color throughout the world. A number of events, one by themselves, may not have created a major problem, but collectively, these events are causing a fear and a trembling throughout the world of people of color. They are no longer confident. They don't know what to expect. Let me enumerate some of those events. The invasion of Grenada. Several explanations have been offered in the political forum to explain that invasion. And the more explanations are offered, the more it is clear that lying characterized that series of programs. The invasion of Panama. The kidnapping of a head of state. The attempted assassination of Fidel Castro. The assassination of Patrice Lumumba. We are referring to victims of color, which is the reason that people of color have looked at these events and are wondering, are we next? What gave rise to these events? They are not convinced by any of the explanations that have been given to date. Back in 1945, the dropping of the atomic bomb. Not on Germany, on Japan. Perhaps more disturbing is the recent pronouncement by one of the United States congressmen upon hearing a statement attributed to one of the leading Japanese politicians who scolded the American laziness and incompetence in an industrial way was met with the rejoinder that perhaps the Japanese do not know who we are. Perhaps their memories are too short. We would like to remind them that we had sufficient labor efficiency, technological skill and innovation to develop, manufacture, and drop the atomic bomb on Japan, and we can do it again. These statements cause concern. They concern of people who want to know, are they next on the hit list? The attempted assassination of Muammar Gaddafi, as well as Saddam Hussein, again are causing people of color. When Czechoslovakia and Hungary were supposed to have risen to demand their rights, and Russia moved to suppress those rights, there were no invasions by the freedom-loving countries of Russia. Lithuania, Latvia, no invasion. Poland, no invasion. The question is there a double standard? And if so, what is the basis? How long will it last? And should we take precautions? On one hand, we are told that no third world country can have nuclear arms, especially if they are Muslims. However, it is permissible, if not desirable, for Israel to have nuclear weapons. And those weapons were directly obtained through the efforts of France and materials from the United States. Is there a double standard? If so, from a legal point of view, I'm again suggesting that the lawyers are in an excellent position to perform the analysis on the data, to highlight the issues, to determine whether there are consistencies or inconsistencies, and then let the people know. The reason this is so important, that approximately 75% of the world is comprised of people of color. So if our future is at risk, we want to know it now. We don't want any illusions. We do not want to guess. We want to know both the defining and the accompanying characteristics of danger, if any, that is embodied in the term New World Order. Consistency, inconsistency. That's what gives rise to injustice. The same standard applied to everyone could still be unjust. But the double standard is inherently unjust. Do we have a double standard? Let us look at some of the contemporary events. Iraq invaded Kuwait. In my opinion, an illegal invasion. I know that there are some geographers and some historians who would like to argue that issue. I have reviewed the data, and for me, I have concluded it was an illegal invasion. That invasion prompted a gathering of the United Nations, and a number of resolutions passed by the Security Council after August the 2nd, 1991, And in effect, the Security Council said to Saddam Hussein, you have 5 months to be out of Kuwait. We will discuss during this period of time as much as you want. We can either threaten each other, we can engage in political, diplomatic shadow boxing, we can sit back and not speak to each other, but when the 5 months is up, you will have bombs and planes and there will be death. That scenario, since it's so recent, we have a general familiarity with. I would like to put another scenario next to it in the same geographical region to determine if a similar, identical, or different standard would be employed in the New World Order. The country of Israel in 1967 invaded the Golan Heights, the West Bank, Sinai, East Jerusalem. The Golan Heights was appropriated. Just simply, the Knesset said it's ours. We don't want to discuss it anymore. Period. 1967. The West Bank and Gaza was occupied until today. Not 5 months. From 1967 until 1992, notwithstanding numerous United Nations resolutions saying you must get out, you are illegal occupiers. They are still there. Not only have they not left the land, they have received from the United States of America from 1967 until the present $77 billion. Not bombs, not guns, not bullets. $77 billion that we know about. In addition to this amount of money, the people of Palestine have been the targets of some of the worst suffering, death, genocide, and racism that we have ever seen. And it is going on. Schools just closed. People denied an education. No explanation given. Just, we want to close the schools. We don't want to discuss it. Don't ask us any more questions. Golda Meir, while Prime Minister of Israel, visited the area where I went to law school. And in a speech at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, she pleaded with the audience to send their children and themselves to Israel because there are too many black Jews. We do not want any more black Jews. That's what she said. But that didn't stop the $77 billion. Today they're asking for $10 billion in guarantees. For what? To build settlements on the land of the Palestinians. $10 billion. What arrogance can you have? Their reasoning, Hitler did terrible things to us, therefore give us Arab lands to punish Hitler for what he did to us. If Hitler killed 6 million Jews, give the Jews part of Germany. It is out of the question. There's no American president, there's no European head of state that would even in their sleep suggest such a scenario. But everyone feels comfortable saying, well, something has to be done. We don't know what it is, but something must be done. They have what is known as a peace process. Not bombs. I mean, Saddam Hussein had 5 months. They said, no, we must have a peace process. So the Israelis said, we have to decide who we're going to talk to. We don't like him, we don't like her, we don't like her, so we don't want to talk to him. They said, well, you have to be nice to them. Russia! Well, we can't say Russia. Yes, we can say Russia. They said, well, we're going to deny some of the people to be a part of the delegation because Israel really doesn't want them, doesn't want to talk to them. How in the world you're going to have a peace process and you're going to say, I'm not going to talk to these people? Is there a double standard? They are saying to Libya now, we think 2 people committed acts of great human violation. We would like to have them to try them. Don't you try them, because we don't trust you. We want to try them. We don't care about extradition treaties. Give those people up. So they went to the United Nations and said, get us those 2 men. But there is a warrant for the arrest of Manock and Begin that is still outstanding. It has never been recalled, issued by the government of England for terrorist acts, killing among others British citizens. Are they going to ask for his extradition? Prime Minister Major. Will this be a campaign issue? The question is there a double standard? And if so, should we know about it? We are told today that we can feel comfortable. We're reassured that we shouldn't think in racial terms. The fact that you are people of color, it doesn't make any difference. We have progressed to the level that we see all people as one family. So don't please become paranoid. Don't overdo this race thing. We love everyone the same. If that is in fact true, there's a level of comfort that we can incorporate and move on to the more weighty issues. We can think about and plan how to correct the environment, how to bring about clean water and clean air. But we have to first know that we are not being the targets of a new world order genocide. I haven't passed any comment. I'm simply raising questions, just in case. The New World Order. We are told that, first of all, there is no racism in the world, or it's very little. Secondly, to make sure that people of color have the same rights in the world as everyone else, the United Nations is in place representing everyone in the world. The United Nations will guarantee that you have nothing to worry about. Be at ease. This sounds very good until you find out that there are 2 bodies in the United Nations. One is the Security Council, and one is the General Assembly. And for all practical purposes, the General Assembly is an advisory body. They just tell each other how they feel. All major power is reserved for the Security Council. And there are 5 members that have veto powers in the Security Council, and 4 of them are of assurance and consolation can that send to people of color when we represent 75% of the world's population? I wouldn't think about it too long had I not read the United Nations Charter. I wouldn't have thought about it too long had I not read the secret letters between Brezhnev and President Nixon. Mr. Brezhnev, when he was head of state in Russia, when it was still the Soviet Union, wrote to Nixon and said, "We are acting rather silly. We won the war, the Americans and the Russians. The Japanese and the Germans lost the war. They have now moved up economically. We are moving back, and the third world countries are dividing us and sucking our blood. If we will just put our hands together, we can rule the world. We don't have to ask anyone any questions." While he was telling the world about the glories of communism and the humanism embodied in communism and the epistemological, the axiological, and the theological aspects of communism, he was writing to his friend in secret. The last sentence is of great importance. He said, "After all, we are both white." That's why I have to wonder, are we at risk? So if Mr. Yeltsin, Boris Yeltsin in the United Nations, and with Russia broke, how comfortable can you be that rules of justice and objectivity will prevail? Let me come to my last subtopic, and that relates to the issue of Israel and Palestine. Because most of us have concluded in the last few years that the two most serious outstanding issues to send a signal to the third world to give them a level of comfort represent South Africa, where you had wholesale institutionalized racism supported by Europe, and America, and many of them said they have to support the white people there because they are Christians. The question is whether it was just Christianity or was it Christianity plus race? This is a very serious question that we must ask honestly and forcefully. South Africa appears to be headed in some direction where it may resemble, in some respects, Zimbabwe. Not exactly. In some respects. I recently, last year, spent about 3 weeks in South Africa, giving about 40 lectures. The largest audience was 8,000, the smallest was about 3. But from the townships to the urban areas, I went all over South Africa. And my impressions have been captured in this book, Laws Without Justice, Do You Still Want to Be a Lawyer? The second area that the world has come to see as crucial is that of Israel and Palestine. Let me give you just a little thumbnail brief history. I am now quoting and referring to the University of Chicago Museum, Fields Museum. And Mr. Yoko, Frank Yoko, who is considered to be one of the, if not the leading authority of the antiquity of the Middle East. According to a personal letter written by him to me, supported by approximately 5 pages of bibliography, he asserts that the original people in the Middle East were of African descent. The original Chaldeans, the original Phoenicians, the original Arabs, Ishmael, his mother, his father, were of African descent. Combinations of Nubians, Ethiopians, people from Upper Egypt, of African descent. He says that somewhere around 2500 BC, a gentleman by the name of Abram, who subsequently became known as Abraham, founded the people called the Hebrew people. Mr. Tacitus, a great Roman historian, there were not too many, but plenty of the younger, plenty of the older, and Tacitus, you just about summarized them all, unless you want to include Julius Caesar. He was asked the question, where did the Jews come from originally? And Mr. Tacitus, in 80 AD, not long after the reign of Jesus, who was familiar with the Roman Empire and familiar with the colonies of the Roman Empire. And at that time, Canaan was a colony of the Roman Empire. He said everyone in Rome knows that the original Hebrews came from Ethiopia. 80 AD. I would like to know if you know anyone around the same period of time who attributed the origins of the Hebrews to any other location, namely Russia or Europe. We are told further that from the time of Abraham to the time of the Great Expulsion, 70 AD, and until the time of today, we have about 4,500 years. During that time, there was a kingdom of Israel headed by Saul, David, Solomon, Jeroboam, and Rehoboam, covering approximately 500 years. Based upon that 500-year kingdom, we are told that the Jews today are entitled to land in Canaan. 500 out of 4,500 years. If the European Jews are entitled to land in Canaan because they ruled for 500 years, my people ruled for at least 1,500 years. I have a superior claim. More importantly, in some of my subsequent lectures, I will go through the detailed history of people of African descent. But tonight, I cannot, unfortunately. I must move to what happened at the turn of the 20th century, when Zionism arose, when a group of people said, we want a homeland. Now, to get a homeland in the modern world is kind of tough. During the days of colonialism, it was kind of easy. If you had enough guns and enough armament, you just stole it. Sometimes you would take tuberculosis germs and put them in a blanket and then give them to the Indians as a gift. And you told them we're not going to fight during the winter because that wouldn't be human. Here, to let you know we're sincere, here are some blankets. Take them, cover yourself up. Maybe in the spring we'll fight again. And they wiped out millions of people. When Columbus and Cortez came to Mexico, there were, at that time, 25 million Aztecs. When Cortez left, there were 2 million alive. So the Aztecs did not make any monuments to Cortez. 2 million. In Tahiti, when the missionaries came, there were 200,000 Polynesians. When the missionary, within 35 years, 20,000 people remained. In Hawaii, when the missionaries came, there were 500,000 Polynesians. Today, less than 2,000. In Zaire, formerly known as the Congo, when the Belgians came, there were 57 million. At the time of independence, 13 million. On the continent of Africa, during the aegis of slavery, 100 million people were kidnapped from that continent. Most of them never even landed in America. And someone is asking me to remember the Holocaust. Where are the museums and the monuments to that 100 million? That's why we need the Lord to analyze the data, to make sure that I'm not misinterpreting the data, to make sure that my analysis is accurate and acceptable to people of reason in a civilized world. When the Zionist group came to England, they said, we want land in Canaan. Who were these people? They were Europeans. They were not Arabs. They never lived in the Middle East in their life. Their parents didn't. Their grandparents didn't. Their great-parents didn't. They have never been there. They do not come from that region at any period in their history. They came from Europe. They look like Europeans. They act like Europeans. They talk like Europeans because they are Europeans. They converted to Judaism in 740 A.D. in the land of Khazan under King Baloo. 500,000 converted. How do I know? The Jews told me. Read the book by Arthur Koestler called The 13th Tribe, where he delineates step by step how a group of Europeans converted to Judaism and then adopted it as their own. And according to Arthur Koestler, 90% of the people today in the world who call themselves Jews are not biological Jews. Why is this important? Because Mr. Shamir and before him Mr. Bacon said they were entitled to the land because God gave it to them. As lawyers, we must ask, when did he give it? How did he give it? How many witnesses were there when the gift took place? And who were the recipients? The only suggestion of a gift is in the book of Genesis, where there's a promise to Abraham and his seed. That's a biological term. That means in order to even make a claim, you have to be biologically connected to Abraham. Europeans are not biologically connected to Abraham. From Noah's 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, the Europeans are biologically connected to Japheth. The Africans and the Arabs are biologically connected to Ham and Shem and Cush. So we can make a claim. Europe cannot make a claim if they want to use the Bible as justification. But, of course, the Zionist elders did not want to get involved in details. They just said, give us the land. Let's not worry about these biblical things. We want the land. England said, well, since colonialism prevailed, what if we give you Uganda? At first, the Jews were going to take Uganda. What would have happened if the Jews had gotten Uganda as a homeland? The people in Uganda would say, no way. You cannot come here. This is our land. the same in South Africa, the same in Zimbabwe, the same in Ghana. The people there would have said, you must get out. If you want to come here, ask for immigration visa. Why then is there a different standard applied to the Palestinians? We know from the United Nations documents that there were in Palestine at the time the Zionist movement took real form 500,000 Arabs and 50,000 Jews, Sephardic Jews. 500,000 Arabs and 50,000 Jews. So obviously the Zionists couldn't go and have a vote, since everyone loves democracy. You couldn't go to Canaan and say, would you vote out the homeland? So if you can't vote, what is the alternative? Force through the colonial structure in this country provided the mechanism for the establishment of the State of Israel. And they have an Israeli flag, and the lines in the flag reference from the Nile to the Euphrates. That is the land that the Israelis claim. They want the PLO to change their charter about pushing people into the sea, but they're not changing the flag, which symbolizes that they have a claim to all land between the Nile and the Euphrates, which means from Egypt all the way through to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, all the way down to Iraq. They say that's ours. God gave it to us. When will they repudiate that? No one will even ask them. The politicians, they don't want to touch this. It reminds you of MC Hammer. They say you can't touch this. So if you can't vote your way in, the only thing left is through the colonial structure, shoot your way in. And then tell the world, don't listen to them. Don't listen to those Arabs. They're erratic. They have some strange religion anyway. I think they call it Islam or Muslims or Mohammedans or something. And they've always disliked us. So you use propaganda and the media to try to convince the world that the Europeans are entitled to that land. The same as the Europeans did in South Africa. They told the world, when we got there was no one there. If there had been someone there, you'd think we would have gone there into someone's land. There was no one there. It was all open. So we just came. We looked. We even asked. Hello out there. So in 1967, the war, the Arabs say now, even though Israel is illegal, we're willing to compromise. That land that existed before 1967, Israel keep it. You can have secure borders, keep it. But the land that you got as a result of the war, international law will not condone for you to keep land that you acquired from war and aggression. Give that back. That's the West Bank. That's East Jerusalem. That's the Golan Heights. Sinai has already been returned. Israel said, we will talk about it. We will think about it. We will discuss it. And maybe we won't. And the West said, come on, you should. It would be nice. Not like Kuwait and Iraq. A new standard. So we have to understand they've been through so much. Just think, the people who have suffered so much. We have to, please, ladies and gentlemen, let us be fair. What will be the outcome of the peace conference? What will be the dangers to the third world? The world is now fragmented and it is becoming fragmented and regionalized. Germany is going to take over all of Europe, so just don't even think about anything else. They have it. It's just a matter of time. The Deutschmark will be the basis because they're the most efficient, they're the most organized, and they're the best managers, and they are going to rule. And Russia will provide for them a nuclear umbrella. That will be the arrangement. And they will provide on a gradual basis technology according to their scale and their marketing plan. Japan and China will hook up under a loose umbrella because they're both frightened of these threats being hurled against them. Africa will have 1,200,000,000 people in just 30 years. Of course, they won't get a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council because we of African descent are recognized and held to be the most uncivilized on the planet. That's the image. And that image will persist until the lawyers begin to analyze the real data. Now, some of my 13 books have that real data, but there are others more qualified than I, like Van Sertima and Marcus Garvey and Duse Muhammad Ali, just to name a few. But please don't forget the great scholar, Mr. Edward Blyden. And do not forget Mr. Uthman el-Jahiz, who wrote during his lifetime 200 books. And one of those 200 books is entitled The Glories of the Black Race. A man of African descent born in Basra, that is in Iraq. In 800 AD, the brother started writing. But these writings are not taught in our school. So I had to put them in my book. The book is called The 7 African Arabian Wonders of the World. We made a desperate call to the United States today and asked them to send an avalanche of books because they sold out. Send more books. We have to have the knowledge, then let the lawyers. Don't take my opinion. Take it to the lawyers and tell them to analyze it and see whether or not it makes sense. The world is being fragmented. The United Nations is being controlled by the United States. Security Council is a joke. The General Assembly is a joke. People are becoming increasingly concerned and increasingly uneasy. And you will be in the best position to know because you're going to get yours first. You won't have to wait for the rest of the third world. You will find out before the rest. So have that sign up. Help! Just in case. Keep it in your purse. Put it in your school books. Put it in your legal robes. Just a sign. Help! And be cognizant of where the TV station is so you can run out there with the sign. Help. Because Europe is tired of you. They don't want you. Germany doesn't want you. They don't want you sweeping the streets. They don't want you washing the dishes. They don't want you scrubbing the floor. They don't want you. And the French don't want you. With all their glorious romanticism and with all the philosophical underpinnings of Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, they don't want you. And if I can believe Mr. Powell, they don't want you here. I'm sure you are tired of me. And I have exceeded my allotted time, so please permit me to tell you that it is a great pleasure for me to be with you tonight. And I hope that from the books and other things that we have, we will be able to keep in touch. I'm going to be speaking for approximately another week, and there is a program outside of all of my different speaking engagements. We have promised that we are not going to repeat any of our lectures. There's a different topic each night and a different preparation for each topic a different analysis for each night. So the mere fact that you may have been disappointed tonight does not mean that you will be disappointed tomorrow. Tell all of your friends, we welcome them to come, and please ask the people when you get outside to explain to you about Come Alive and Stay Alive, and buy some of the Qurans out there and give to your friends, because that's the way this organization has raised money to try to bring in speakers who are not afraid at all. No fear, not the smallest muscle moves. In the name of Allah, the Magnificent and the Merciful. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Dr. Mansour has agreed to answer any questions if you have any questions on the subjects that he's raised in his speech here tonight. If you'd like to put any questions. Gentleman there.
Yes, sir. Alaikum salam.
You were talking about your double standards. Have to infiltrate the media. How are we to infiltrate that media?
Well, to be frank with you, it is an indictment upon us that we have not organized. We're not accusing them of lying. We're just simply saying, let's keep a balance. That's the good old spirit of competition. Why don't we have a third world media? The reason? Because colonialists taught us to be beggars. We have lost our drive. We have lost our initiative. We don't believe we can accomplish things. We believe someone else has to do it for us. That was the environment of slavery and the syndrome of the colonial operation. There is no reason whatsoever that we must rely on CNN to tell us what is going on in the Middle East, or in Asia, or in Russia, or in Malaysia, or in Africa. It's a matter of us determining that we are going to liberate the information process, but we'll pay for it ourselves. If you're going to be dependent on the West and you're begging every time you want something, you are not going to be free. You will perfect the art of begging. If you want to be free, you have to take responsibility for your act. Find out what it costs. Do a business plan. Find out how that business plan will operate. Then put up a facility and work out practically the impediments. Some third world leaders in some third world countries do not want the real information being recycled. So you have to look and plan and analyze and weigh, but it can be done, and we should have it in place within 5 years. With the 2-3 billion people, if we cannot afford to run a major media operation, Chinese are launching satellites. Design satellites, launch satellites, build receivers, and make sure you know the truth. That should be the first priority of the people of color, just in case they have to say help, there's someone to hear them. Next question. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask you then yourself, does the recent attitude of the Western press towards the events in Algeria highlight your double standards that you spoke of already?
I don't know what the Arab press has said about Algeria. I have read a number of different reports about Algeria. I have not seen any consensus. The Arab League has not met over that issue. I think had the Arab League met, you would have gotten some semblance of a consensus. Oh, the Western press is a bit embarrassed because on one hand, they want elections. At least that's what they say. But then when elections are held and they don't like the people who are elected, then they either become silent or they encourage indirectly the suppression of those elections. They start saying things like the people who are elected are really fanatics, and the people who are elected do not stand for the proper perspective. But that is not what they're saying in Russia. That's not what they're saying in the rest of the world. When they have elections in Jordan, when they don't like the results of the elections, they say, well, King Hussein is becoming erratic. But the question is, what about the elections? If King Hussein is representing the sentiment of the people, you should expect him to get a Nobel Peace Prize. But this is not the case. I say to the various Islamic groups in Islamic countries where the masses of people are becoming angry and bitter, and I certainly understand it, I say to them, express your anger, express your bitterness, but prepare an agenda. Just to have an election and to put a lot of people in a parliament, if those people don't have a plan of action, the country's going to suffer. The people will suffer. And then the next thing you'll get, it will be cannibalism. We will turn on each other, fighting shadows, because we don't have a program. It is the responsibility of many of these Muslim scholars here in London to utilize their backgrounds in economics, accounting, and management, and prepare a practical program so the people know where they're going. So some of the politicians, some of the people that get elected, they've been in the village all their life. They're not going to be able to devise a new 5-year plan, but they can understand it if it's explained to them over and over and over. I'm saying instead of marching up in the street with just signs waving here and there, let us research practically, no dreams and no isms. Let us get the practicalities of how to build and advance a nation like the Japanese. When they dropped the atomic bomb on the Japanese, the West thought that they would never hear from them again. But they applied themselves, they disciplined themselves, they pulled together knowledge. Korea, Hong Kong was set up because England insisted that the Chinese use drugs. The Chinese said, we don't want drugs. We have studied it, and we see what impact the drugs have on our society. So England fought a war, called it the Opium War, so everyone will remember it. That's how Hong Kong came into being. But from that experience, the people of Hong Kong began to think and analyze and read. You can't just quote poetry. We must read, master the computer, study economics, travel to the other countries. There are people in England from Taiwan and Korea. Ask them, what did you do? People from Japan say, sit down. Instead of going to the discos night and day talking about I love my people, go and get some knowledge to build the people. This is the only responsible way that we can be a part of the real New World Order. Work for it. Next question.
It's important for young Muslims to get involved in America? And what is your view on public defense work?
I'm sorry.
What's your view on what fields of law it's important for young Muslim lawyers in America to get involved in?
Law?
What fields?
Communications law, banking law, security law, antitrust law, telecommunications law, computer law. These are the priorities. Criminal law is fine, but you can learn that in the summer. You got to get some of the strong courses so that you have the framework to advise your clients properly. You have to do that. Other questions? Yes. Walaikum salam.
You were talking about the threat to the colored peoples of the world. I'm very scared that AIDS is a serious threat and seems to be affecting more third world or colored people than it is in Europe. I even consider that it may be another European blanket filled with tuberculosis. What is your view of AIDS and what people should be doing about it?
AIDS is certainly a very serious affair, and there are two types of AIDS, HIV-1 and HIV-2. HIV-1 tends to be the AIDS virus that characterizes Europe and the U.S., HIV-2 in Africa. I have looked at some of the figures in some of the countries that are supposed to have the strongest amount of HIV-2. It seems to me that the term AIDS is used to cover a whole lot of things, much like cancer. I'm not trying to diminish the threat. It is a threat. I don't believe, at least at this point, I have not been convinced that the amount of deaths from HIV-2 is the same as HIV-1. In HIV-2, the expansiveness of the danger is great because it tends to ride the medium of venereal disease. So it gets to the heterosexual population much sooner. Most of the people who are affected by HIV-2 have had some liaison with prostitutes, so that you got large number of military people in certain cities who have been infected, and it goes very quickly. It's recycled. HIV-1 is, the medium is blood, and that blood usually comes from hypodermic needle, which afflicts most African Americans who have HIV, and sexual contact where bleeding takes place, which is why the homosexual syndrome has given rise to so much of the HIV virus. There is a test that was developed by an African American that is the most sensitive and the most reliable test to date. In 3.5 minutes, it will tell you whether you have AIDS or not. This test, contrary to the Western blot test, the Western blot test is a test that takes about 5 hours. In the United States, it costs you about $600. This test, the VTEC test, takes 3.5 minutes, and it will take you probably about $5 or something to know. So from the point of view of distributing that kind of test so that we know just how great the danger is, it seems to me that should be pushed. Secondly, there is some indication that in the country of Kenya, there is a breakthrough in devising a cure for AIDS. This breakthrough is in the process of being documented. It is also controversial. The West does not seem to want to recognize the breakthrough, but people from the West are flying to Nairobi every day to be treated for AIDS. The results thus far are very promising. There's a lot of underground activity that I'm not at liberty to discuss in order to preserve the technology and preserve the system where they can continue to use it. I think that AIDS is a very deadly affair. I think that we need to look at it very carefully, but ultimately we're going to be talking about the immune system. We're going to be talking about the deterioration of the immune system to the point where it cannot produce the sufficient white corpuscles to defend the body. The question in my mind is whether or not we should be spending as much time on trying to find a direct cure of AIDS as we should be devising remedies to build the immune system, so that if one is so unfortunate to come in contact with an AIDS virus, it will become much like the flu and much like tuberculosis and diphtheria, that we have an immune system that is equipped to handle that. There are indications that there are some natural herbs or combinations of herbs that are efficacious in almost transforming a weakened immune system into a vibrant immune system. Some of these herbs are in China. Some of these herbs are in other places. I feel that one area of legitimate study for us is to conduct systematic experimentation in these various herbs. I was surprised on one of my trips to Brazil to find that the Amazon Indians didn't know what cancer was. They had no idea what a heart attack was, no conception whatsoever what a stroke was. And when I began to explore through questioning, they said whenever they feel any uneasiness, they know where to go exactly in order to avoid the problem. We can watch animals who have various diseases wander out in the woods, and they come back in a few days they start getting well, following, whether it is instinct or an acquired knowledge, herbal sources to cure themselves. I think that the situation is too serious just to approach it in a haphazard way. I'm not prepared to say because they don't have AIDS in the Amazon that we should imitate everything the Amazon does. I am saying, however, that we should not rule out doing systematic studies to address the immune system. And when you go outside there and you get some information on the come alive and stay alive, you will see that that was what the target is, to address how to build the immune system so that the body does those things which are natural in protecting itself. Next question. Alaikum salam. I think he's going to take this gentleman and you'll be next.
Salam. What we do with corrupt in third world, all the leaders they corrupt. What we should do with them?
With whom?
With corrupt leader in
corrupt
third
leaders?
world. Yeah.
Well,
In example, you bring in Algeria, the people they want to work, they want to do something. But the people, if you said something, you take you to prison. What we should do with these people? They can't do.
All right. I mean, that's a practical question that I think deserves a practical answer. One can say, in the ideal world, you just tell them to leave. They're not going to leave. No, I'm saying that I'm not saying you're saying the people to leave. You would tell the leaders, won't you please get out of the way because... No, let me finish.
Look what happened in Algeria.
I understand that. I'm trying to lead up to that. I said that you cannot tell them to leave practically because they're not going to leave. They have guns, they have ammunition, and they intend to stay. The question is, how do you organize people who are unarmed? How do you organize people who are in need? And how do you assure them that there's hope? That's the practical question. And to me, the practical answer is you have to have a plan of action. If what most people do is to say, we don't want a plan, what we want are some guns, and after we shoot up the leaders, then we will wonder about how we will implement our survival. I am simply saying where this approach has been used in the past, it has resulted in a form of backwardness, the people starving, have no idea of how they're going to protect the economy, where and how they're going to live. I'm saying simply we must prepare practical programs while we sensitize the people. If the people were sensitized to throw out the French, they can throw out their leaders. The question is, after throwing out the French, what will you have? Will you get other leaders? Because out of some of the same people who are now saying in the mosques, we love you, we want to work for you, some of those same ones want to be in power. And some of them, not all of them, will do the same thing and worse. Well,
give them chance.
right, but I'm saying it's good to give them a chance, But if you don't provide for them a program, you know what that chance is going to result in. The chance is going to result in the destruction of your people if you don't have a program. So while you want to give them a chance, which is wonderful, what is the program that upon which you are asking the people to join you?
We know which our live. We come back to Quran and Sunnah.
Right, but I'm saying let's just write it out so that people know clearly. Let's break it out. Let's say to the people, economically, as soon as we get into power, this will be our steps. This is how we're going to balance the budget. This will be the nature of the economy. This is what we're going to export in order to earn foreign exchange. This is how much it takes to build houses. This is how we're going to build the houses. Here's how much time it will take to build the houses. This will be the educational curriculum. Why can't we, for once, develop these programs now? Instead of saying, no, let's just quote phrases, let new people come in, and when they see the ignorance, they will exploit us just like the others. Ignorance is the reason that the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said that the advice of a learned man is worth more than the prayers of 1,000 uneducated. Secondly, he outlined in specific terms and he implemented in specific terms what the program would be for the Muslim community. There was no guessing. It is outlined in specific terms. Let us take that term, take those programs, and spell out how many computers will it take to run a country effectively? How many? Where will they come from? Who is going to be trained to use those computers? What size will the computers be? How much will they cost? What if the people that you're counting on institutes a boycott against you? What are you going to tell the people? I'm sorry I made a mistake. I should have known this. I should have thought about this. No. What was taught when they brought from the Battle of Badr the prisoners that were taken prisoners of war by the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said to the captive, if you will teach 10 Muslims how to read and write, you'll be free. That's the plan. The plan is you got to start with knowledge and education in order to have a responsible constituency. That's what the Quran teaches us. We don't want that message. We said, no, I don't like that one. I like that battle better. Let's kind of emphasize the battle and go for the arm. And when people are dead and lying in the street with their blood coming from our hands, we are going to be judged if we deceive our people. Yes, sir. Alaikum salam.
And how we're not able, how the Muslims weren't able to support them. What I was wondering was how, because I listened to the news and that, they're always saying that the Arabs are divided, they can't agree on this thing, they can't agree on that thing. How we as Muslims, let's say sitting outside the Middle East, can help, or from the Middle East, help to unite the Arabs so that maybe together as brother Muslims we can can go some way towards solving this Israeli problem.
In my opinion, the most effective thing to do is that we must educate our own people throughout the world. Many of the Muslims don't know what the issues are. They simply don't, because they just hear the television and the radio. And some of the leaders don't really tell the real truth about the Middle Eastern conflict. So you have access to the truth. You have access to the books. We must read the books, whether we write letters or postcards. We must inform our people of the facts. There's 1,200,000,000 Muslims. If we inform our people of the facts, they will respond. It's just like Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali used to be called Cassius Clay. He decided he was going to become a Muslim around 1962. Muhammad Ali raised or weighed the risks. I spoke to him before he announced that he was going to be a Muslim. He was in my house, 6532 Dover Street in Oakland, California. And he confided that he was going to declare. But he weighed. He said, if I declare, these are the risks. After he weighed everything together, he said, I am prepared to accept the risk. When he went to the fight, if he had lost those fights, how many of you would have been proud of Muhammad Ali? If he had gone into the ring, the first one he lost, he said, Allahu Akbar. And the next one he lost, he said, Allahu Akbar. And by the 10th fight, you would say, look, we don't want this man. He was victorious, so he gave us a sense of pride. He united the whole Islamic world because they were all identifying with him. Chinese, Japanese, Asians, Africans, African Americans. This is what I mean. We must weigh the strategy, develop a strategy, but we have to win. What does winning mean? Whether I'm talking about Algeria or Liberia or South Africa, I must deliver to the people what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam delivered to the people of his day. I can't let them starve because I get excited and that I feel like I want to defy. And some of the people that are defying, you can't find them when the bullets start. But the people's blood is in the street. I'm simply saying that we here have been privileged by Allah to be exposed to knowledge and information. We must use that information to prepare our people for the New World Order. Whether they're in Malaysia, Indonesia, whether they're in Europe, wherever they are, we have to study what is the best approach for the economy of Morocco. What is the best? Where does the money come from now? What relationship does Morocco have today with France? If that's cut tomorrow, what will be the economic repercussions to the people? What alternatives do we have? Can we devise another economic strategy to just in case? Another social strategy, just in case. For our people, this is what we need. And we need to recycle it every time we meet. Today, I can understand the mass of people getting excited without education. They just say freedom, 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 freedom. But for us just to echo freedom, what is this? You spend 4 years in college to learn how to say freedom? We must provide for them what they can't do for themselves. What they can do for themselves is to express their feelings. They can do that better than us. What they can't do is what the prophet did. Provided them a plan and implemented that plan, and a man 53 years old carried bricks to build a mosque because that was what was necessary. He said, if you have just a needle and thread, sell that. Become a merchant. We must teach our people how to survive in commerce. This is what they don't have, they're not privy to. How do you work the computer? How do you work a computer? We should have computers throughout the villages, teaching the Quran by computer. And then after teaching the Quran, teach business management. It's wonderful to memorize the Quran, but at the same time, why don't we memorize some physics and chemistry? So we have options. We just might want a nuclear bomb. How are you going to get it? You just going to wait? And Yeltsin and the White House is talking about Star Wars, that they would own jointly. Now, maybe it doesn't matter that they're both white. They still may be objective. But just in case. But what are we going to do? We don't study physics. We say we're enthusiastic. We want to change the government. We have become political junkies. Everyone wants to be a politician. From the ignorance of their hearts. We don't want to read. We don't want to go to the library and sacrifice. We don't want to spend 8 and 10 hours in the library. That's not so glorious. You don't get so much recognition doing that. But that's what our people need. If we are to survive and prosper, unless we want to be the most illiterate, and the most backward and the hungriest and the poorest in the world, we must read and develop economic strategies in order to advance our people. Not for ourselves, not so that we can get some prize, but our people need us. They want to eat. Just changing the government does not guarantee they're going to eat. How do you know they can eat? You have to be able to look at an economic model. You have to see the landscape. Japan has no natural resources. They have to go all the way out, get natural resources, bring them all the way back to Japan, manufacture them into goods, and then send them back out again as finished goods and have a better product at a better price than those that have natural resources in their country. How do they do it? Planning, thinking, sacrificing, looking at each other and saying we cannot fail. We will not fail. Don't forget the bomb. We will not fail. What are we doing? Say, let's have a demonstration. We love them. We're going to show the world. Who are you showing? Yes. 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 I know when he went into exile. You want me to tell you about Algeria? You really want me to tell you about Algeria? Let me start with Faris Abbas. Abbas Faris. Yeah, let me start with him. In the Second World War, when he wrote a letter to Mendes France in France, and he said, it is not right for France to keep Algeria in slavery as a colony. Why? He said, because we're both white. You want me to give it to you? And I'll give you the document, the copy of the letter that he wrote. So the brainwashing that took place among leadership is not confined to one man. It's confined to an institution of colonialism that brainwashed people, and unless we bring a plan to develop those people, we will have the blood of the people on our hands. They are not going to eat slogans. Our people have had enough slogans for a lifetime. Get rid of the racism, get rid of the slogans, and let's build a people 1,200,000,000 strong. Yes, sir.
Brother.
Alaikum salam.
I'm following you around. I don't know why. Yes. I want to put my question to you in this way. You know, some of our brothers now, we have formed an organization called the Organization of Islamic Development, and we are paying specific emphasis on the people from Afro-Caribbean sort of background. We are encountering lots of problems. Maybe I discuss with you that later, if time permits. But I have a question here now, and this question is this. Public Enemy, for instance, in America, and you mentioned that you were about to put forward, in fact, you're putting together a film.
Yes.
What is the message you think Public Enemy is sort of putting over? Are they really on the line, as I may put it?
There are a number of messages that they're putting forth. One is self-help. One is anger. I mean, they just summarize the feelings of the community. People who have seen and experienced suffering so long, they just want someone to let them know that they exist. So when they hear someone abuse the system that enslaved them, they like it. And that's one of the functions. Another function they fulfill is they're trying to raise a level of consciousness. They're trying to suggest self-help programs, conceptually. But in all frankness, I hold myself to a higher standard for development than I do Public Enemy, or I would James Brown, or I would most entertainers in America, because these entertainers are not college trained. They do not read 4 and 5 and 6 hours a day. They do not operate computers. They are not comfortable with the concepts of economic development. So they're doing the best they can within the limitations of their experience. But we have had a higher, not in terms of snobbishness, but in terms of intellectual opportunity, opportunity to acquire knowledge. And therefore, you can't expect from me, or I don't expect from you, the same thing that I would expect from those who haven't had that opportunity. What I expect from us and our friends is to prepare an orderly document. Let me give you two examples. One example is that the herb ginger is mentioned in the Quran as having therapeutic value. And there are 1,200,000,000 Muslims. Why would not the Muslims develop ginger plantations? Especially when the most conducive climate for raising ginger in the entire world is Jamaica. So why wouldn't we then plan a strategy? This is the land. These are the number of people that we will employ. We will take the ginger and we will make a ginger tea. And then we will take the ginger and make a ginger herbal extract. We will market the extract around the world, letting 1,200,000,000 people know that according to the scientific studies, we have the best ginger in the world. Why take less than best when you can buy ginger from Jamaica? I'm saying that this program requires marketing, packaging, agriculture. It requires management. It requires labor. It requires finance. But these are the things that the people in this room could be doing. If your group, the mere fact that you are targeted toward the Afro-West Indian or Caribbean, that doesn't mean we can't work together. We're saying devise a plan, and the people here will help push your plan. We don't have any hang-ups. We just say, let's get, and if we don't have a plan, let's get together and devise a plan. So there's something that will be good for Malaysia, something that will be good for Indonesia, something that's good for the UK, something that's good for Egypt. Let us study economic comparative advantage. We don't need to start with $1 trillion. We may start with just a small move, but we know how it will grow. We plan that growth. That is what I am encouraging people to do all over the world, especially the third world. Don't try to leap into all the skyscrapers and you want to put together the next supersonic airplane. While that takes place, corruption arises, people become disappointed. That's the biggest problem in South Africa today. I just spoke with some of my friends, including Sheikh Ahmed in South Africa, and the biggest problem now is the politicians are lying night and day. It's a contest to see who could outlie the other. And they're promising the people, and the people, it's just like the bingo games or the horse track or the gambling or the alcohol and the drugs. They just have expectations at such a level, 99% of all those promises will never take place. And those politicians will find some convenient excuse and say, well, it really wasn't my fault, it was that politician. I tried to do it, but those other politicians wouldn't let me. Elect me again and see what I do next time. This is all politicians do. It's a history. We must keep the people focused. Focus on reality. Next question. Yes, sir. First of all, it's what stops them is the British, the white people won't let them in. That's what stops them. But in terms of whether this is right or wrong or consistent or inconsistent, I think I can answer that it's certainly inconsistent. When they had people from Cuba, white Cubans, come to the United States and go on boats and come to the United States, they embrace them. They say they are longing for freedom. If you bring some white people from Eastern Europe into England, they'll find a way to accommodate them. That's a double standard. The Haitians, they said, no, we don't want Haitians. So it's a matter of color. They do not want people of color in this country. Now that's just obvious. And everyone knows it but us. We are still trying to say they don't really mean that. I mean, what they just need to be educated a little bit. If we tell them about how they stole the land in America and how they stole the land in South Africa and how they stole the land in Israel, they will come to their senses and realize that we're not so bad after all. It's nothing to do with theft. They don't like you. They don't like the way you look. They don't like the size of the nose. They don't like the texture of the hair. That's not every single white person. I'm talking about the leadership, those who make decisions. They don't like us. And the less white you look, the more they dislike you. So if your hair is straight, they tell you, we don't like you, we don't dislike you as much as the others. So that then the Asians start saying, we don't want to be around the Africans because if we can get away from them, we have a chance. But hang around them and you know where we'll be. Unconsciously. So you'll find in the colonial system, fair-skinned Egyptians didn't want to be around dark-skinned Egyptians. This is colonialism. Sure. But now, how do you correct that? You don't correct that by just simply saying colonialism. You have to bring about the historical process where this syndrome unfolded so that it can be redressed. There's a history, there's a knowledge, it can be corrected. But it can't be corrected if we don't know the process. There are fair-skinned Hindus who will never go near a dark-skinned Hindu. But they both talk about we're all going to go to Nirvana one day. You have to put that in context, all the way back to the Harappian people, the Mohenjo-daro people, and to show how it evolved so that you can dismantle it in a practical way. There are fair-skinned black Americans who do not want to see a dark-skinned black American at all, ever. There are black Americans that owned slaves during the period of slavery. They were simply imitating their white slave masters. So how does one deal with that? One produces the record so that planning can take place in an orderly way. The same way that we were taught to discriminate against each other on the basis of our hair and our skin complexion, we can be untaught that. But that means providing the information. That means the people in this room have to raise the banner. No racism. There's a difference between racial pride and racism. Racial pride is legitimate, racism is not. We don't need it. It doesn't contribute anything. Let us be the examples based upon practical steps that we know how to follow. We have time, I'm told, for one more question, but I will stay for individual questions, but we can have one more public question, and I don't know how we decide. No, it's not, I don't have the power. I'm a guest.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Et je m'excuse, disons, de ne pas pouvoir m'exprimer en anglais. Et je vais demander à mon frère de
Oh, he's going to translate. All right, good.
D'interpréter ma question.
All right.
Et d'abord, je remercie Monsieur Mansour de ce brillant,
Thank you very much.
Conférence. J'ai été beaucoup impressionné par le contenu. Moi, je suis étudiant en Arabie Saoudite à Riyad. J'étais beaucoup content, et comme je l'ai dit, le docteur a dit dans sa conférence que les musulmans doivent étudier les sciences
beaucoup de choses qu'il a mentionnées. Mais chez nous, en Arabie Saoudite, les étudiants étrangers sont confrontés aujourd'hui à de grosses difficultés. Les étudiants qui viennent d'Afrique, qui viennent d'Amérique latine, par exemple, dans toute l'Arabie Saoudite, ces étudiants-là souffrent de ce gros problème. Quel est ce problème? Quand on vient d'ailleurs en Arabie Saoudite, eh bien, il nous est demandé seulement d'étudier les études islamiques. Et tous ceux qui étudient en Arabie Saoudite se spécialisent seulement en études islamiques, en théologie. Moi, dans mon pays, plus spécialement la Côte d'Ivoire, il y a plus de 200 étudiants qui ont étudié dans les différents pays arabes et qui se sont trouvés isolés du domaine gouvernemental. C'est-à-dire que qui n'ont pas, disons, obtenu qu'on appelle du travail dans le domaine gouvernemental. Actuellement, ils vivent parasites sur les musulmans. C'est-à-dire sur les des sadaqat, ils se sont considérés une sorte de mendiants. Hein? Bon, ça, c'est un phénomène vraiment qui est lamentable. Docteur, si vraiment il peut nous donner des éclaircissements sur ce problème, et lui qui est beaucoup plus écouté, vraiment s'il pouvait soumettre disons, des différentes solutions à des Arabes. Je ne parle pas seulement de l'Arabie Saoudite, il y a beaucoup de pays arabes, l'Égypte, Arabie Saoudite, Maroc, Libye, où étudient beaucoup d'étudiants africains qui sont confrontés à ces problèmes. Il n'y a pas de possibilité pour étudier la science qui permet aux musulmans de s'avancer. Donc moi, je voudrais vraiment m'arrêter ici. Et je m'excuse d'être trop long puisque le sujet demande un petit...
No, that's good. It's a complicated question, but it's a good question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I don't know why I've been chosen really to translate because I'm also from a French-speaking country, but I'll try my best. Well, first of all, is thanking you very much for your conference, for its content, and he would like to ask you some advices on a problem that he was faced with in Saudi Arabia. I think essentially the problem is that every single student from third world countries, particularly from Africa and South America, are more or less obliged or at least given grants only to study Islamic studies, theology. So since you are always emphasizing the necessity of acquiring knowledge, he would like, with the forum that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, please to try to submit this to the different organizations or governments that do take care of such things. Because apparently was citing the case of Ivory Coast, where it comes from, whereby there are at least 200 individuals who graduated in theology and they can't find any work. You have addressed this problem before.
All right.
So if you could help him, please.
Very good question. Thank you very much. And when you go back to Ivory Coast, if you see Ousmane Diab, tell him that his brother sends his salams. First of all, we must keep in mind that Saudi Arabia, in terms of its educational policies, is relatively new. We're talking about a country that in the 50s and 60s had relatively few number of schools, so that the large program for school construction is a function of 1974 forward. The policy and planning for education just for their own inhabitants really took hold in the 70s. At the same time, there were requests coming from all over the world for people to have scholarships. What was believed to be the priority was to provide and equip the students with a religious background so they could go back home and spread the faith. That was the priority. Today, there are an increasing number of countries who are beginning to vary that policy. There are people from Asia, United States, Africa, all of them were given the same theological scholarships. That was the priority of that period because it was deemed to be the fact that Christian missionaries were flooding Africa. They were spending hundreds of millions of dollars bringing people from the United States to flood Africa to try to undermine Islam. And the only way that the community of Muslims in Africa could protect themselves was to have a vital, mature knowledge of Islam. So in those early days, we didn't have the Sheikh Ahmed Didat to travel all over Africa challenging the Christians to debate so that the people could hear all of the issues. It is similar to Bishop Michael Marshall, who in England announced that he was going to start converting Muslims in London to Christianity. And some Muslims overreacted and they got upset and nervous. It's unnecessary. I'm here. Convert me. That's all I'm saying to Bishop Michael Marshall. Convert me. And let us have the largest audience hear the conversion process. So I will tell you about Islam, you tell me about Christianity, then let the people decide. Now I've been here now a number of days and Bishop hasn't responded. So any of you who know the bishop or the Anglican presiding archbishop, please tell him I only have 4 or 5 more days. Please don't let this opportunity pass without him getting a chance to convert me. Because if you convert me, you have done an incredible achievement in terms of impact. Convert me. However, now without those years of Sheikh Ahmed Didat, the emphasis was getting as many people educated as possible. Today, that policy is beginning to change. They're saying that theology alone is not going to build a nation. You have to have physicists, you have to have contractors, you have to have engineers, you have to have planners, you have to have telecommunications people. So you will find a new emphasis emerging in the Middle East. I visited Qatar, the African students in Qatar. They are varying the curriculum now. Saudi Arabia will be varying the curriculum because the priorities are beginning to change because the perceived needs change. So we understand your question. We're just glad to tell you that changes are taking place. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for being our guest. Ma salam.
Where we discussed very briefly the purpose of the general meeting, what was a particular aspect of black self-organisation. My name is Peter Herbert, I'm a barrister, and my Javed will speak about the solicitor's branch of the profession very briefly, and we'd like to hear Dr. Al-Mansour's thoughts on the ideas that we've got. Just to give you a very brief outline, I think one of the very few names that Dr. Al-Mansour might not know is actually a name called John Thorpe, who was the first African barrister who qualified in 1850 in Britain. The first Indian barrister was Monmahon Ghost, who qualified in 1868. And that early tradition was followed because from around the world, the black lawyers came here to study and to go home. And in 1900, they led the Pan-African Congress, the first, really, meeting of African peoples who also worked very closely with the Indian Congress Party, and they met in 1900 in London. And that was a meeting of African and Asian students to liberate our countries. The suffering that engendered from that was led by Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, who were disbarred in 1928 by the establishment just down the road here, the Inner Temple. And they held a marvelous ceremony to resurrect both of those individuals and make them honorary members for their contribution to the liberation, I think, of their people, supposedly. But it's ironic that the two most famous black lawyers, lawyers full stop in this country, were not from here. The way in which black lawyers have developed has been constrained always by the way colonialism, I think, that you've referred to, has been part of the process. And the black communities here were denied the education and the opportunities to actually qualify. And if you look at the oldest black communities in Liverpool, in Bristol, and in Cardiff, you will see that they did not produce one black lawyer who was able to practice in those communities. And if you go to Liverpool today, out of 300 practicing black barristers, there is one Asian barrister, and he's from Manchester. If you go to Cardiff, there is one African Caribbean woman who is from London, who has gone there to practice now. And in Bristol, there is still no black barrister, and there are a handful of African Caribbean and Asian solicitors in those cities. And that is the story of lack of opportunity and self-denial that was imposed upon those black communities, for the very purpose that they wish to prevent us from self-organizing in economic terms and in terms of our political development. When Dr. Mansour talked about the importance of self-organization, one of the ideas that black lawyers have now is to promote self-organization. And in recent times, in 1968, the first black set of chambers was established in Lincoln's Inn, just round the back of this building. When they set up that chambers, they said, well, we can't actually have a collection of black people self-organizing together. We must have a white QC to lead it. The only problem with that is they couldn't find a white QC who would lower themselves to associate with black people. So they relented after a good year or two of negotiation, and a set of chambers did emerge and proliferated, and there were, I think, in the early 70s, mid-70s, about 15 black sets of chambers, which were euphemistically called by the establishment ghetto sets. They had that terminology that was applied to our real ghettos outside in our communities and applied it to the organizations of professionals. There are, in fact, Jewish ghettos at the bar. There are Jewish ghettos in solicitors' firms, but they're never referred to as such for fairly obvious reasons. There are also, strangely enough, even a Welsh ghetto, because Welsh lawyers found it a problem with their accent and their colloquialism to get accepted in the mainstream establishment. But again, please don't call that a ghetto, because it's white, and we can't have white people called or termed as ghettos. What we'd like to do is to actually put out the fact that black self-organization for lawyers, as for barristers in particular, is a good thing. One of the ideas that we've got is to take the concentration of black barristers from London and from Birmingham and spread it out, because our communities all over the country are in need of representation. In Liverpool, as I've said already, there is an absolute absence of black representation. People, and some of the barristers are here, have travelled up to Liverpool. Some of the solicitors have travelled up from London to do cases because they lack the local representation. And if you've ever encountered the racism in that particular city, you'll know just how stark the situation is. It's a parallel with it, the worst that the world has to offer. And the slavery and exploitation that was referred to, they actually conveniently have a tunnel which goes from the Albert Docks in the quayside, that great development area, which emerges in the court precincts and goes from the court to the police station in Central Street. And that is something which is a legacy which is still used, the one from the police station to the court, certainly, in times of emergency, by the authorities still there. But that's a reminder of our history and part of our legal history. What we'd like to do is take black self-organisation and take it from London and Birmingham to the outlying cities, and make sure that black barristers certainly have a base where we needn't actually live, we don't actually have to uproot our homes or families, but we can actually go and live and work and serve our communities. And the way that that would occur, this is the part of the process, would be by having it based in the communities. And therefore, one of the things that is an offer from Liverpool 8 Law Centre, which came out of the uprisings in 1981, is an offer for a black set of chambers to be based in Liverpool, in the Law Centre, which would be accessible to the black community. We needn't leave our chambers and our marvellous names on the door in London, but we can actually advertise and promote ourselves to our own people in Liverpool. We can force the City Council, which has so much of our money, to actually put some money back into the black legal community and into the wider community, so that we gain the knowledge and the expertise in many areas of work that at the present are generally speaking denied to us. And when Dr. Al-Mansour spoke the list of areas that he'd like lawyers to practice in, those are precisely the areas of law which generally speaking we don't practice in. I'm one of these summer black lawyers actually who does criminal work some of the time. But not to actually minimize the importance of that, we say we ought to have the expertise across the board. And what we'd like to do is to hear just some thoughts, because we will be having further meetings on this, some of the thoughts from this audience about A, the necessity of that, and B, the practicalities of making that work for all our communities. If I can just ask, before we take any further questions, for Maqbool Javed, who's a solicitor, to give you some of the thoughts that he'll have about self-organisation for black solicitors.
It's always very difficult to follow someone as eminent as Dr. Ahmed. So I must say that it's been a long time since I've felt the way that I do now after having heard it. A lot of the things he's said, obviously, we have thought about, and that is a society, and we have, in our own way, tried to raise the consciousness of our members and the community in our work. As a solicitor, I've obviously had experience of the discrimination that exists in the profession, and we have for many years now tried to have dealings with the professional bodies, trying and explain to them the difficulties that are faced by black people, and have to some extent had success. We have been able to force the profession to have race relations committees. We have forced the professions, in particular the bar, to set targets. And those of you who are involved in the law will know about the 5% targets that were set by the Bar Council. And therefore these successes have come about because of pressure that has been put on by the society and other black lawyers. I am particularly drawn to the notion of self-organisation because I firmly believe that we have reached the stage where we really have to decide where we as black people fit into this society. As a professional, you will find extreme difficulties in trying to come to terms with your culture and the sort of prevailing culture of Western civilization. As a Muslim, there is a conflict between your beliefs and the value system of this, what is essentially a hedonistic society. And therefore, from that individualistic point of view and a community point of view, you will always come in conflict. You will never be able to escape the fact that you are not part of this society. That may seem very radical, but I mean, I think in practical terms, Muslims realize that. And therefore, while climbing the ladder of success in the profession, you will always be self-conscious of the fact that you don't always fit in, and you will also be told that you don't fit in. You will be denied opportunities which are granted to others, and therefore you will then lose confidence and begin to think that perhaps you're not good enough, and perhaps that your role in life is to play a secondary role. So those people who were able to join city firms and practice international commercial law soon realized that they were part of 100 people, and they were just there because they happened to be the son or daughter of the High Commissioner of Jamaica or some other country, and that it just looked good to have a black face. Those of us who weren't as fortunate to join commercial firms and ended up with legal aid practices, which do sort of public work, had similar experiences. Even firms which profess to have progressive views and equal opportunities policies, at the end of the day, essentially had the same ethos, which was that if you were black, different culture, you wouldn't fit in. Someone like me, people would be shocked to think that, I held views which didn't fit in with their own views, the middle class sort of lifestyle which is expected of a black person. We have to give up our principles. Someone told me the other day that they went to a meeting organized by lawyers, and a black person said, oh, well, if you want to get on in this game, you have to wear cufflinks, because lawyers, I've never seen a lawyer who doesn't wear cufflinks. Now, that's a silly example, but essentially, it's perceptions. In order to get on, you must don the robes of this society, because if you don't, you won't get on. And therefore, there will come a time in all sort of our careers, whether it be in the law or outside the law, when you will come up with this conflict, when you will have to decide, are you prepared to give up your principles in order for this success, this material success that you may or may not gain. And therefore there are lots of people who are disappointed because when they achieve this success, whatever that may mean, they realize that the principles they have given up have led to a situation where psychologically they are not able to sort of continue their lives in sort of spiritual peace or whatever. So I mean, that sounds a very sort of philosophical way of leading up to what I'm talking about, which is that there is an alternative to trying to give up your principles and fit in with this society, and that is self-organization. And a lot of the things that Dr. Amusu has mentioned and Peter also mentioned is self-organization. And I firmly believe that if we are going to be successful in this society, if we are going to be successful as lawyers, and if we are truly going to serve our community and not exploit our community as part of a white firm, that we really have to organize ourselves in such a way that we can practice the law and also at the same time retain our principles and our values and be true to ourselves. Because those of you who were at work during the Gulf crisis and all the other sort of traumas that we have been through recently will know there was a time when you were sort of extremely depressed about what was going on, and people just were shocked to see, why you felt this way. During Ramadan, people are shocked to think that someone who's a lawyer, who's had the fruits of Western civilization, of education, still believes in this barbaric practice of starving themselves from dawn to dusk. They find it shocking because they think, here we have a person who's been who has been exposed to all the beauty of the West, and yet he or she will still want to wear a hijab, or want to fast, who may want to pray. It's a complete and utter shock to them. And therefore, you are the enemy. You are someone who they cannot trust. And if you are, for Muslims, I mean, I don't want to be melodramatic, which I mean, I could be, because it seems to me that we have reached this situation where we really are at a crisis point. I mean, I can't sort of put that in strong enough terms, because with the fall of communism, Muslims are the new enemy, and you can see it all over Europe. You can see it in the fall of the Soviet Empire. They're not worried about Russia or Lithuania, they're worried about Kazakhstan. Are they going to have the nuclear weapon? That's what worries them. That's international situation. We can close our eyes to it, we can say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. But the point is, as black people, as Muslims, we are now the enemy. And what has happened to our communities is that our communities have suffered and will continue to be exploited. There will be people who will attempt to convince us that it is the Afro-Caribbean part of our community which is suffering, whereas the Asian, the West affluence of West London is everywhere. You know, we are all rich, successful millionaires with the name Patel or whatever, you know, which is not the case. Go to the East End of London, go to Bradford, go to Manchester. Majority of people are of Asians, I mean, attacking stereotype views people have, are employed in the lower sort of end of the industry and are exploited. And therefore, I think Islam is about one ideology which believes in justice, which believes that whether someone is a Muslim or not, if they are being treated unjustly, then it is your duty to fight for that cause or person. And therefore, the law is there to be used and to be used for the benefit of our community. But if we are going to fight for the cause of justice, if we are going to help our communities, then perhaps in order to retain our principles, the only way we are going to do it is to organize ourselves, and in the legal profession that will mean having our own sets of chambers, and in as far as solicitors are concerned, in having our own firms. And because with the recession, all the high flyers who managed to get into the city, they're the first ones to be kicked out. All the people who thought, I've got my cufflinks, I've made it, they're the first ones out. So the reality is, let's wake up. If anybody's going to help us, it's us. And therefore, the sooner we realize that, the sooner we put away our differences and combine together in firms where we all understand our views and have a similar culture, the more able we will be to help our community. Thank you.
We've got time really for a couple of questions. I don't know, you may actually want to hear Dr. Ahmad's comments on what the ideas we'll be discussing, actually, but we have to be able to keep it brief because we've got here about 9 o'clock.
As a Muslim, any other person, because the Muslims were having a long history, and they were trying to make a very good civilization in many different parts of the world. But the problem is when they lose the virtues. I mean, when they didn't carry on the truth of the Quran. They went back to, I think, in the worst places of history, and you can see now their societies and nations how bad, I mean, they are. I don't know if they are aware of that, but you can see they became very hopeless in a many sense, because the people, they lose the confidence and they lose what the Quran told them to do. One day I was in a small shop. The owner of the shop was a Pakistani. He said Muslims are going to be the most hopeless people in this world. It was before the Gulf crisis. I said, why? He said Iraq captured Kuwait. And he said, it's very bad. I mean, they have to do something else instead of trying to do, make so many problems in between themselves, and they can't face the world. I mean, I'm closing my question is, what is the advice that the people have to do for themselves instead of trying to watch their only victims?
Lost something like 7 tons of gold in Swiss banks. Bokassa has lost a lot of money in France. Legally, on a legal basis, what can we do, future third world generation, in order to recuperate the money which belongs to us and which has been stolen by these dictators, kleptocrats, on a legal basis?
Well, very quickly, theoretically, you can bring a lawsuit in the areas. There are a lot of practical problems. One is you have to have evidence of the theft. 2 is that you have to have the cooperation of the Swiss government. 3, they have to be prepared to waive the secrecy laws. 4, they have to decide, perhaps the most important, that it's worth their while. So if they don't think it's worth their while, they would just keep you going around in circles and circles and circles. I would say that you should institute lawsuits, and you should devise programs to try to recoup the money. But at a practical level, I would say don't count on it. Keep the lawsuit for historical purposes, and harass them and harass them and harass them, because you owe it to your people. They want to know that you were not just going to accept it without protest and without a fight. So I think legally there are lawyers that I know in Switzerland who will fight, and they will pursue the process, but that doesn't mean they'll win. But I think the people owe that, or owed that. In the meantime, I think that we should pull together our minds to see how we can get the next $200 or $300 billion and make sure that goes to the right place. Thank you very much.
Could I just, 3 final points I'd like to make before we close the meeting. The first is, if anybody wants information about the Society of Black Lawyers, we've got it here, newsletter, membership, and T-shirts. The second is, Dr. Al-Mansour talked about genocide. On the 22nd of February last year, a black child was killed in the Thamesmead estate, Roland Adams. There's a demonstration to close down the fascist headquarters in the borough of Bexley. You should have all got a yellow leaflet. The Society of Black Lawyers and other progressive black organisations are actually demonstrating to close down this racist headquarters. And if people here care about what Dr. Al-Mansour has said, they will be there on that Saturday. There are times when we do need to fight and do need to protect our own people. That is one of them, and I'll ask for your support then. The third thing is to actually thank Dr. Al-Mansour and those who organised this meeting for being here tonight. Thank you.